virtually zero after 9/11. I mean, after 9/11, support for the Kashmir cause in the United States and European Union became almost zero. In effective support, they would give statements, they would give parliamentary resolutions, but effective support became almost zero. But even by 97, support had tapered down very sharply because they started seeing India as a prospective future ally. Now, there's a book by C. Dasgupta on the partition. If you read that, you will find what was in the British mind when they were insisting on Pakistan. What was in the British mind when the British commander was saying, don't go into Gilgit, don't go into Skardu, don't take the northern territories. They did not want India to control those territories because those territories are a gateway to Central Asia and to Afghanistan. They didn't want India to have access because they did not trust India. They felt Pakistan is a reliable ally. I mean, if you remember CENTO, for example. Pakistan is a reliable ally, Indians are not. The Muslim League supported us, the Congress was neutral, leaning towards Japan. So that, in a sense, was very, very important on their mindset on Kashmir and on various other issues. But from that time, the pressure started getting moderated in Kashmir, etc. So we had economic policy also, a realistic policy. If you remember, economic liberalization started during that time. A lot of the economic industrial licensing was abandoned. A lot of improvements took place in economic policy, which led to a boom in economic growth around that time. So that is 1992-97, a period of increasing realism in affairs. Now I think you'll be happy to know that I'm going into the last phase, which is the unipolar world. I mean, and the last phase is basically in which we accept that the world is unipolar. That there is one strong superpower in the world, and that superpower is the United States. And from Mr. Vajpayee onwards, we have been trying, in a sense, a policy towards the unipolar world. Now, 2001, in my view, the United States made a huge mistake after 9/11 when it declined India's offer of a comprehensive relationship in which military will coordinate to take care of the Afghan problem. At that point in time, the United States chose Pakistan. If you look at my writings during that period, you will find that from that time I told the Americans, you guys have made a big mistake and you're going to pay for it big time. Because the Pakistanis are not going to fight Afghan terrorists, they're not going to fight the Taliban. These guys are created with Taliban, they're not going to fight it. So the mistake the Americans made was rejecting India's offer of a partnership in 2001, which was made. In 2003, although this is not a very popular view with many of my colleagues, my friends, we made a mistake in declining the American request to send a brigade or a division into Iraq. The idea was to send a division into Iraq, into the northern territories of Kurdistan. Now Kurdistan is where 46% of Iraqi oil is. If we had a division in Kurdistan, there is no law and order problem there. There is no insurgency there. The Kurds are frankly totally non-insurgent. They are very friendly with NATO, very friendly with America, and the minimal amount of insurgency is taking place in Kurdistan. So basically they wanted us to have this so that they can release some of the troops to go to other places. In my view, we could have had a much higher profile in the region. We would have had the benefit of access to Kurdistan oil at reasonable prices. Today that access is American companies and European companies, and we are paying huge premiums for the oil that we are importing. We're not getting subsidized oil from any part of the world, and I think that's a failure of diplomacy more than anything else. Had we gone to Iraq at that point in time, we could have had access to large amounts of oil, although of course, after all the developments in Iraq, people are saying, aren't we lucky we didn't go? I still say we should have gone. So that's a relatively stable area. It would have immediately made us a player, and it would have immediately made us a player that the Americans owe big time to. When they owe you big time, they have to do certain things for you big time. Today they don't owe us big time. We don't owe them, I mean we owe them a little more, they owe them, but we don't really owe it for big time. Had we gone to Iraq, they would have owed us big time, and we could have taken that benefit in numerous geopolitical ways, which unfortunately we did not do. Whether it Kashmir or so many other issues, or more importantly than the geopolitics, I would say oil, because oil is very crucial to us. As you can see, the problem we are facing because of our oil dependency, we could have got Kurdistani oil much cheaper. Of course, going back to the thing now, I would like to say that Iraq, leaping to 2012, I'm a little unhappy. Our government is not having a more active policy towards Iraq. because Iraq is also a huge supplier of oil. And we need to be very active in Iraq. Now, we were not active in Iraq in 2003. We should be active in Iraq now and make Iraqis very friendly with us, because Iraq is not very friendly with the United States because of the Shia-Sunni factor. It is a fact that NATO has basically taken sides with the Sunni, with the Wahhabi against the Shia. Whether it's in Iraq, where they put a lot of pressure on the Iraqi government for concessions to the Sunni groups, whether it's in Bahrain, where they're keeping a Sunni king against the Shia minority, whether it's in Syria, where they're totally against the Shia group which is running the country, the Sunni majority. There is a clear distinction between NATO and the Shia. We are completely neutral between Shia and Sunni. We have both Shia and Sunni in India as citizens of our country. So we could have an access into Iraq, and we could have a strong diplomatic move into Iraq, which unfortunately for whatever reason we have not done so far. And let me get back to where I was. I mean, this so-called. Now, we have been, in a sense, definitely, if I may say so, we have played our cards a little better during this time. We have played our cards a little better from 1992 onwards, frankly. And we have played our cards reasonably better from 1998 onwards, except that today what is happening is the unipolar world is no longer unipolar. Today you are seeing the emergence of a country that is definitely the most serious challenge to American dominance since the end of the First World War, and that is China. So you are seeing the rise of China. And the question is, what should be the Indian response to the rise of China? Should it be confrontation? Now, in some respects, China is a very large problem for India, much bigger than Pakistan. In some respects, it can also be an opportunity for India. So let me end this discussion on foreign policy by giving you a few of the contours of what is taking place in China. And let me start, I'm not going to talk about 1949 or all that culture. Let me start in 1997. In 1997, there was because for me, economics isn't command. For me, I regard my country as a great country when I don't see a beggar on the road. I regard my country as my government as an effective government when I see poverty eradicated. Now, in 1997, there was an Asian financial crisis. The Chinese leadership at that point in time took advantage of that crisis. Mr. Zhu Rongji was the Prime Minister. He took advantage of the crisis by completely reorganizing the state-owned enterprise of China. 31 million people were thrown out of jobs during 4 years from 97 onwards. I'm not talking of 300,000, I'm not talking of 31 dozen, I'm talking of 31 million public sector employees were thrown out of their jobs in China for the 4 years beginning 1997. And he completely reorganized the state-owned enterprises. Because of that, economic development boomed in China. Many of these people got jobs in the private sector, they got jobs in the other SOEs. With the economic boom, after 6 months, 1 year, most of them got jobs. But the reality is, they took the decision and 31 million people had to be sacked because of that decision. 2008, they missed the bus. 2008, you have a very large economic crisis. That was the time when China should have taken a second leap into economics and gone in for more privatization. The state-owned enterprises have, in my view, reached the end of the road in terms of the benefits they are giving the economy. There are limits to which they can grow. Whereas the Chinese private sector, the Chinese entrepreneurs are definitely suffering. They're not growing to the extent they can grow because the Chinese policy is always that the first 9 positions will be filled by the state. The 10th position by the private sector. If you have got an airline, for example, if it grows beyond a certain point, take it over. If you got a television station, grows beyond a certain point, take it over. If you got a cement factory, grows beyond a certain point, take it over. In my view, today's world, that is not a good policy, and China needs to privatize. I don't believe that it's going to create any political fissures in China. I don't agree with analysts who say China is on the verge of a social revolution, social unrest, some Egyptian kind of thing, any Tahrir Square. It's not going to happen. The Chinese are very practical people, they want economic growth. A Chinese businessman is as fanatic about Chinese interests as a Chinese army man or a Chinese state-owned enterprise, maybe even more. So they missed that bus. They missed that opportunity. Now, that being the case, what has happened is that has given an opportunity for us. Because today, India has become a very crucial market for China. Today, In 2008, the collapse of the international financial system has also resulted in a severe weakening of the influence of the United States over the international economy. Because till 2008, people trusted the financial institutions led by the US. After 2008, nobody trusts them. Arabs don't trust them. Russians don't trust them. East Asians don't trust them. They know they've been cheated. So from that time onwards, the financial systems in the United States are in a weakened position. And the financial systems are what essentially drove the superpower status to a very, very high level. So that is come at a time when if China had gone in for a massive privatization in 2008, by now it would have been very difficult for anybody to catch up with. Fortunately for us, it is not. With the result that today, as a market, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in telecom, whether it's in so many other items, India has become a critical market for China to do for the state-owned enterprises to survive. With the result, in Chinese foreign policy, there is, in my view, as somebody who's studying China, I may be wrong in this, because it's very difficult to understand India, it's very difficult to understand China. There is a clear disconnect between the army and the state-owned enterprises on policy towards India. The Chinese PLA is very much has bought into the Pakistan Army's rhetoric that India is an enemy, you have to fight India, we have to use unconventional warfare against India, we have to prepare for a war against India. And the Chinese military even today is hostile to India. It is a reality. And we have to face that reality in our own defense planning, in our own defense posture, in our own defense expenditure, we have to face that reality. On the other hand, the state-owned enterprises are telling the army, you guys are crazy. If we annoy the Indians, we are losing a market which is today $80 billion. And in 3 years it's going to be 120 billion. In 6 years it's going to be maybe 250 billion. So you guys are crazy to make us lose that kind of market. So go back to go back and do your sums again. We can't afford it, especially when Pakistan is becoming a diminishing asset. Pakistan is today a liability for China, not an asset. Previously, Pakistan was an asset to the United States and an asset to China. Today, it's a huge liability for the United States. It's a huge liability for China. The difference between Pakistan and China, as I keep telling my Chinese friends, they're not very happy about it, is that you spend money in Pakistan, you make money in India. And you should learn to like the country that you make money from and not keep liking the country that you spend so much money on. So this little conflict is going on within the Chinese system as to better relations with China. If the state-owned enterprises win the argument, if they have a better policy towards us, if they can keep their military under control, then we may see a much better normalization of relations, we may see more mill-mill contacts, we may see more of this kind of situation happening, in which case then we will have, in a bipolar world, we have a bipolar policy of access to the United States, access to China. But I'd like to say this is still a battle which is raging, it is still a battle which is going on, and as of now we have to assume that the PLA is the dominant factor, and the PLA being dominant factor, China is a huge problem for us and a problem that we have to immensely watch out for. But if the policy changes, it can also become a huge opportunity. So as I said, I end this by saying, today we are entering a bipolar world, a world of the United States and a world of China. And possibly, if both sides are willing to give us the concessions, are willing to give us the advantages, are willing to give us the respect that we deserve, then I think as a country we need to adopt a bipolar policy. Thank you very much for listening so patiently.